Greetings, neighbors. Welcome to another episode of the Perfect Sense podcast. I'm your host, Alex Becerra. Today, I am thrilled because we are going to take a deeper dive into analyzing the housing market in Sacramento. So I'm very excited. We are featuring a great guest, housing analyst Ryan Lundquist. Before we jump in, Ryan, do you mind just telling the audience a little bit about yourself, what you do, and that'll set the tone for our conversation.
Yeah, sure. I'm Ryan Lundquist. I'm a certified appraiser. Been doing that for over 20 years. Let's see, I've been married for 26 years, 2 Gen Z boys. I love playing with numbers and Excel, but I'm not a nerd. I just like the story behind the stats and understanding the market.
Awesome. I really appreciate that you sort of allude to the story of it all. I think you're familiar with Casey Jenkins here at Safe.
Yeah.
And a few episodes back, I was chatting with him really kind of about the home buying process and like how does your financial institution support you throughout that process, really speaking more to folks that are like in that first time home buyer experience. And it's great talking with Casey because we look at things from a very like financial banking lens, but I'm really excited to have you here today because you can speak more to like, what are we seeing in terms of the market? And so let's kind of use that as a general overview. Can you tell us in the Sacramento area, what do things look like right now? And what are buyers and sellers experiencing in the market?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting market over the past 4 years, to say the least. And so I'd say it's almost like it's a situation where low demand and low supply have met. And so we have about, I would say 70% of the market's happening, but 30% lower than normal number of buyers. And so there's that part, but you also don't have that many sellers. And so it's a market where competition right now actually feels pretty normal. And which is strange for a market where I think a lot of people are looking at the math going, hey, can I participate or not? Or some people are just stuck. They're waiting and going, hey, I just need things to improve before I jump in. And so, it feels like this pregnant moment. And, a lot of people are going, when can I participate in the future? And so, but I will say that last year things got pretty dull. But this year it's tightened a little bit. So in layman's terms, I'd say the market went from mom jeans to skinny jeans. And so it was really loose last year. And then it sort of got a little bit more competitive this year so far over the last 6 months. And so kind of an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I love the insights there. And I think that like, at least when I look at Sacramento, because one of the things about the nature of my job is I'm very rarely at the office. I'm like all over town in different neighborhoods, learning how things intersect. And I find that to be really fulfilling. But what I also find is that Sacramento is obviously a very diverse community and every neighborhood sort of has its own identity. And you have folks that have been in this region for a long time. I've been in Sacramento my entire lifetime. And you also have some folks that are sort of like transplants into Sacramento. And so do you find any sort of like push and pull between those things, or like how does that influence maybe what's going on in terms of the market?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a mixture in Sacramento. I think that's really one of our strengths with diversity in so many different ways. We're actually home to 3 cities that made the top 10 list for fastest growing. Roseville is the fastest numeric growth in California out of cities under 300,000. Folsom and Elk Grove are in that list. Placer County is the #1 growing county in terms of percentage. Even Sacramento made the list. And so it's interesting, like while some other locations are contracting in California, we're not. And it's as soon as I talk about that stuff online, I mean, people like they either rejoice or they have just a really negative reaction. They're like, but there's more traffic. And I'm like, well, what do we want? Do we want to grow or do we want to sort of be contracting? Do we want to be losing population? Do we want to be decaying? And so I think obviously we need good city planning, county planning to, mitigate traffic and such. But yeah, I think we're an area that's growing and part of that is influence from the Bay Area. It's not 2021 anymore where everyone can move easily. The market's not dominated by Bay Area people, but there still is that influence. And I think, some people look over their shoulder and go, wow, look, Sacramento is a lot more affordable than many places in California. It's like, when you look at our market, about 10% of sales in the whole entire region are above $1 million. And those stats are going to be way different in the Bay Area. And so, so I will say this, this year, to drop a factoid, the number one growing segment of the market between 400,000 and 500,000. And so I think that you do have that first time buyer segment. And, I look at that and go, that's sort of my favorite stat right now, where it's not just everything in Granite Bay and Loomis and everything that's, here's a $5 million listing. Like those are the unicorns.
Yeah.
The bulk of the market is between 400 and 600 locally.
Yeah. So it's actually really funny that you bring up Placer County. So, grew up in Lincoln. I was very fortunate to grow up in Lincoln. And my grandmother was just down the street in Loomis. So she migrated to the States from Mexico. Basically, her husband was doing a bunch of farm work, ended up buying a home that was built in 1972 in Loomis. And that's now the home that I live in. And I do feel really sort of fortunate because even at the time when we purchased her home, it wasn't necessarily something that we had been like really planning out or preparing for, but the universe had just aligned in such a way where like my grandma had passed away. She had a reverse mortgage. My mom was dealing with the estate, and we were able to sort of like buy out the reverse mortgage and move into that home. And it's a very modest home, but I absolutely recognize and observe like exactly what you're saying, where you have these properties that are like just massive value. And there is, I find it just even in the conversations I have with my neighbors, like you do have those folks that have been in the community for a long time, and there's a little bit of nervousness around the growth. And then, you've got more of that sort of just excitement, right? Because like as much as people kind of want to fret, now that we have a Costco in town, it's always busy. So obviously people are happy that it's there.
No, you're on the map. You got Costco and Starbucks and, all the stuff,
Right.
So, and High Hand Cafe in Loomis. Oh my gosh. That's one of the best ones in the region. They have great concerts there too.
Yeah.
There's a lot going for that. So
yeah, that whole little downtown Loomis strip, it blows my mind how it's kind of become like a happening place. Like every weekend there's activity going on down there.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm a Sacramento guy, but we make the trek, and the trek, it's like 20 minutes, but yeah.
Nice. As we expand on this conversation, like usually when folks are sort of watching the market, they have an intention in mind that maybe they're trying to buy or they're trying to sell. I would imagine there are some misconceptions around what people think about the market and what's actually true. So what would you say are some things that people generally misunderstand about the market and the trends that they see?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One, I think a lot of people think that they need 20% down to participate. That's a massive one. And so I think there's a lot of room for education there. But I think also we live online these days, and there's a lot of information, sometimes a lot of misinformation with what the market's actually doing. And so, if you go on, X or Instagram or whatever, there's all these videos saying, the market is crashing or we're all going to die. And I'm like, well, but that's not what the stats show. And so I think that sometimes people don't really understand the trend, or sometimes people, read some headlines and they get to participate in the market and they don't recognize that the good stuff is what everyone is looking for. And so we're in a market where buyers are really picky about price, condition, and location. And so, man, when that home that is well priced, that checks all the boxes when it comes to the market, that's what everyone's targeting. And so I think that some people don't understand that, like, yeah, you have to bring your A game for that kind of stuff. And granted, there's some overpriced stuff, but that's a turnoff though to buyers. When you're eyeing that and going, if the seller's not willing to listen to the market, why would the seller listen to me when I get into contract? And so, I'd say that, by and large, maybe the market feels different than some of the headlines show.
Yeah, I would actually say, like, to kind of allude to what you talked about earlier, sort of the story of the market, right, is because I think from an individual perspective, it's very easy for folks to have a myopic view of like, well, I'm trying to buy and here's the perfect storm of conditions that I'm sort of waiting for before I make that move. But, you know, kind of when we take a 30,000-foot view, while everybody does have their own individual story of like how they purchase a home, there are a lot of things that remain consistent and constant regardless of what your individual situation is. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the dangers in life and in real estate stats, you judge the whole entire market by what's in front of you. And so you might see 3 listings in your neighborhood and go, the market's doing this one thing. But I'm like, hey, look, these are 3 trees and they may not necessarily represent the forest. And so it's like we have to back up and look at some data and go, well, what is the stock market doing? What is the housing market doing? Is this a real trend? When I go to the Galleria Mall and then I see a kid with a mohawk, like, is this a trend, or is this just an isolated incident? So we have to ask those questions, the deep ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Galleria Mall. That also blows my mind to see how far that place has come in 20 years. Like, now it's the spot for luxury stores.
Yeah. Not where I shop.
Not where
obviously.
I shop either. No, I couldn't care less about a name brand.
Yeah.
Except this one. Yeah. So let's take a more sort of singular view, and especially as it pertains to buyers specifically. What are maybe one or a couple things that buyers should really be paying attention to at this moment in time?
So I think buyers just, first of all, can be patient. You have to be ready to act decisively when the right property comes along. But otherwise, it's sort of like, don't let anyone talk you into something. And just, if it's the right time for you, great. Then, be ready to engage when that happens. I'd say pay attention more to condition, inspection reports. Do not neglect those. In a market where the math is tough, you're paying more than, we were 4 years ago because mortgage rates spiked. Be pickier. And so I think that, don't waive that home inspection, if you don't have to, or, get the sewer inspection, know what makes this property tick. I think that's a good idea. But just also recognize you're probably going to be competing against a few offers if that thing is priced low. But I'd also look for creativity. I think it's a market where some people are struggling with the math. And so they really want to watch for situations that, maybe a property off market, or maybe that overpriced seller and it looks really unappealing, but maybe there's a situation where you can talk someone down and because they really need to sell that property. And so there's some situations that work. I had a friend who just listed something in Citrus Heights, and it, had sort of an attached accessory dwelling. And that sort of situation works really well because the person can have income when they buy that property to help offset a higher mortgage. And so I think it's a market where we just need a little bit more creativity. Not every escrow is going to work. The math isn't going to work, but sometimes you'll go, oh, wait. If I get that situation, then that is something that's viable.
That's actually a great callback to sort of the conversation I had with Casey, because one thing that we really want to empower our audience members, or even our members here at the credit union, to do is be very savvy and also recognize that you can set yourself up for success when you have a dedicated team that's really kind of there to help you answer questions and better understand what is relevant to you and how you sort of navigate through that process, right? So you've got the financing side, which is the financial institution, but then we have like partner realtors that we work with, and they really know the market and they do it full time. And so having folks, to your point, that can provide relevant and trustworthy information is really important, because I think especially in this digital age where we default to we go right to the Google cave, the first source is not always the best source.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I say, Chat GPT can't smell if 20 cats live there. And, it's not going to know everything. And sometimes there's blatantly wrong information, on the internet, believe it or not. Okay.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the buyers. Let's look at the other side of the coin. On the seller's side, are there any pieces of advice that you would give to folks that are trying to sell at this moment?
Yeah. So, I mean, I say for sellers to be realistic about what your home is worth. Prices over the past year, they have dipped slightly. We're down 1 or 2% maybe. And so be careful about older comps where maybe the market was willing to pay more. We're in an environment right now where there's more uncertainty, and like gas prices haven't really affected the housing market much, so far. And so, but, it's on the mind of consumers. And so I just say, go to a mortgage calculator, see how much it costs to buy your house, and then be sensitive, And so I find with sellers, they lower the price and then they sometimes feel like they've given up value. I'm like, hey, if your house was never worth that, you're not giving value. You're just getting more in line with what's actually real. And so don't get stuck on the original price. Very few properties actually end up selling there in the region. When you look at this past month, not even 15% of homes sold at exactly the original price. And so you're either going to go higher or lower, and it's almost split with 40% going higher and, I think 35, 40, 45 going lower. And so, so that's what I would say.
Yeah. Wow. That's an interesting statistic. I appreciate you sort of shining a light on that. And I mean, really, at the end of the day, right? Like, I think that's another thing where, like, a lot of time buyers have their particular interests in mind and sellers have their particular interests in mind. But I think, in an ideal sense, everything comes down to a negotiation, right? So I think it's important to have those conversations. And again, when it comes to having that team on your side, folks that can sort of handle that negotiation, have it in good faith, and do it earnestly,
For sure.
so that both parties may have to make concessions, but they're reasonable and they make sense.
Yeah, yeah, I think sellers just, make the transaction good for buyers. It's not just about you. And so it's sort of, a situation where I think sellers have to recognize their power or lack thereof
Mm.
sometimes. And so we're in a market where buyers are hypersensitive about everything. And so even, very picky about staying in contract. And so you don't want to play games with buyers. You got to make it good for them, and you might have to give them something, get the price right, and then if they come back and try to negotiate for some concessions, then that's the nature of the game. If you don't have 20 other buyers trying to buy it, then, work with the one who is there.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. At some point, everything is up for consideration. So
Yeah,
I still,
absolutely. Yeah, and I like that for buyers. That's good for buyers.
yeah. So it's helpful to kind of look at things as they are right now, but you alluded to this earlier, really looking at the long term. And so what would you say your perspective is on the long term status of the Sacramento housing market?
Yeah, so I mean, first, it's not everyone thinks the same about everything. So I wouldn't say here's the one perspective you need to have. But I think in real estate, we just have to recognize that there's two things happening. One, it's a commodity in a sense, because we're dealing with value. Markets go up, markets go down. But like the saying goes, you don't live in your stocks. Okay. And so the one thing that's different about housing is that you actually live in the house. And so I had a friend in a previous neighborhood I lived in, and the guy was obsessed with his estimate, and he would literally get stressed out, when it went down. And so, and I was like, hey, man, like you have to realize that markets go up, markets go down, but you don't want to get so tied to real estate values emotionally. Like my favorite unsubscribe on my weekly blog is when someone emails me and says, "Hey, thanks for all the information. I bought a house and I'm out of here now." I'm like, "Great, maybe don't pay attention to the market obsessively every single day, when you're in it." And so, but yeah, I mean, everyone's different, but yeah, just recognizing that it's real estate is a long term marathon asset,
Yeah.
and people tend to win over time, but they may not win every single year. And I think that's sort of the market that we're in right now. And so, where prices have softened a little bit from last year, but we don't have this really quick change going on either.
Yeah.
And so it's the actual market and the narrative online are, I think, two different things sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that you just mentioned is sort of like, I guess, having a balanced approach, right? Because ideally, the home that they buy would be their forever home. But you've also got a segment of folks that see their home as an investment. And so there is sort of that tug of war between, like, obviously, like you said, you're living in your home, so you want it to be meeting your livability needs and sort of there for the things you want it to be there for. But then again, like, there's a segment of the population that maybe they buy a home knowing that at some point down the line, they're going to look to invest in either a bigger home or a different home, different location, things like that.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, very few first-time buyers buy their forever home. I've yet to see that, right? And so there's such a thing as moving up over time. But then lifestyle changes. All of a sudden, like, oh shoot, we're pregnant with five. What's going on? And how am I going to afford auto insurance? In 16 years or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, life changes, and I think that people figure it out over time. But again, that's where I think there's no pressure on people. Hey, if this makes sense for you, great, do it. But I'm a big fan of real estate, obviously. But people shouldn't overextend themselves and get into bad situations. But I think that's what I like about today's market. There's not all these high risk loans.
Yeah.
Like 2005, hey, can you fog a mirror? Here's $700,000.
Yeah.
And so but yeah, that's what I think.
Nice. Awesome. Well, I want to say I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and join us for this conversation. Before we move into our lightning round, is there any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners, just to kind of wrap up the conversation about the market?
I just say that the market is always changing and the temperature isn't the same everywhere. My favorite way to describe the market, it's like a hot pocket taken out of the microwave too early. And so some spots are blazing hot, some spots are cold and frozen, and other spots are lukewarm. And so you look locally, the condo market, it's colder than, a fixer under 450,000. That is a hot part of the market if priced right. And so I think we just have to remember that even around the country, the Northeast is stronger than other parts of the country right now. And so how's the housing market doing? Well, it depends on what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, I love the very clear illustration of what folks could maybe expect or not expect when they're out there looking
Yeah.
for their home. So great. Are you ready for the lightning round?
I will find out, I guess. Yeah.
So obviously the main overarching theme of our show is building financial freedom and really looking at kind of like financial education and financial empowerment. I'm curious, Ryan, is there any particular financial goal that you find yourself focusing on or prioritizing on at this moment in time personally?
Personally, oh gosh, this is a personal, what's next? A colonoscopy? Where's that probe? Like, do I need to be careful? Actually, yeah, two things. One, getting the kids through college, and which one, hopefully he'll graduate next year. He'll figure that out. And two, starting to one day I'm going to retire, and that's not anytime soon, but, we have to think about those goals. And, that's definitely, on the table for conversation. How are we going to plan for this to make it happen?
Yeah, for sure. Excellent. Well, thank you for being candid. And second part, this is the last question. We are local here to the Sacramento area. You already kind of did this, but I would love to maybe get another recommendation. Is there a particular small business or restaurant that you frequent that you want to give a shout out on this platform?
Shout out Shangri-La in Fair Oaks. It's our favorite place. I'm probably there too often, but we can't help it. And so we just went for a Mother's Day brunch on Sunday. The owner's great. Her name's Summer. Yeah, and I just really love their vibe there. No one beats their ambiance, especially. And so it's a really special place. And
No, what kind of cuisine is it?
yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Farm to fork, whatever. I guess that's what we would say. They have a lot of different stuff on the menu. So
Okay,
I don't know that we could say it's just one thing though.
Okay, cool. And you said that's Shangri-La in Fair Oaks?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. All right, listeners, you know where to go for lunch or dinner. Awesome. Well, again, I really appreciate your time, Ryan. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I hope that at some point in the future we can invite you back to the show.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
If you'd like to learn more about Safe products and services and how we can help you, visit our website at safecu.org and schedule an appointment with one of our professional experts today. Safe is federally insured by NCUA and is an equal housing opportunity lender. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform on topics surrounding financial well-being. This podcast does not constitute financial, tax, or legal advice and may not apply to your individual situation. You should consult with your own financial, tax, or legal advisor for specific information pertaining to your individual situation. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the participants expressing them and do not necessarily reflect those of Safe Credit Union or any of its officials.